thanks to this week's sponsor, Rec Watches. Rec Watches specialises in unique timepieces made from reclaimed materials that carry historic, legendary or heroic stories for enthusiasts who want to carry a piece of legendary history with them. I'm excited to share the X4009 series, a limited edition collection of 4 distinct timepieces, each incorporating aluminium from the legendary Battle of Britain veteran Spitfire Mark 1A X4009. Flown by Australian ace Patterson Clarence Hughes, X4009 contributed to his 17 aerial victories, making him Australia's most decorated pilot of the era. The wreckage of X4009 was recovered in the UK and is now under the care of the Hunter Fighter Collection, HFC, in Australia. This non-profit charity organisation is returning X4009 to its original condition. As part of this historic effort, Rec Watches was entrusted with aluminium unfit for restoration, which has been reforged into the 6 o'clock subdial of each X4009 timepiece. This collection is strictly limited and will never be reproduced, and a portion of every sale directly supports HFC's restoration efforts. Each X4009 timepiece is certified Swiss-made and crafted with uncompromising attention to detail. The X4009 series is available exclusively at recwatches.com/timepieces/limited-editions/aircraft, linked on screen and in the video description, and use our exclusive code TOR for 10% off now. Thanks again to Rec Watches for sponsoring this video. 20th of June 2009. It's the largest air assault mounted by British forces since the invasion of Iraq, and the largest British-led operation of the Afghanistan War. But it's nothing new for the 350 men of the 3rd Battalion, Royal Regiment of Scotland, better known as the Black Watch. A quiet confidence fills the roaring cargo bays of 10 Chinook helicopters, sweeping towards the Helmand River Valley, following their 4 Apache gunship escorts. The Jocks, as Scottish soldiers are habitually called, are the sharp end of Operation Panther Claw. Their dynamic assault is planned to surprise the hardened Taliban fighters and seize their base of operations in the region, ahead of unleashing a devastating mechanised offensive. A vocal minority in the British Army are opposed to the operation, assessing it to be fundamentally flawed. Though this is far from the minds of the Black Watch, as they check the weapons one more time as the Apaches detect suspicious movement and their landing zone nears. At the request of the United States, the UK assumed responsibility for Helmand Province in 2006. American and British decision-makers felt that the British Armed Forces, with their recent counterinsurgency experience in Northern Ireland, were particularly well suited to pacifying the Taliban stronghold. The basic concept was an integrated civil-military approach, similar to the ink spot strategy that saw Britain defeat communist insurgents in Malaya in the late 40s and early 50s. British forces would secure population centres like the provincial capital of Lashkar to create zones of development where the Foreign Office could help rebuild schools and local infrastructure, rejuvenate the local economy, and, like blots of ink spread on a piece of paper, British and Afghan government control would spread outwards from these points until the entire province was secure. By 2009, corrupt Afghan local government, bribery and inflation are squandering the UK Foreign Office funds made available for development. Task Force Helmand is desperately short of the troops necessary to grow the ink blots, and in most areas of development, British and Afghan government forces control the centres, while the surrounding countryside and the key roads between are dominated by the Taliban. Despite the British government emphasising the construction and civil efforts, the ferocity of the fighting in Helmand is at a peak. To make matters worse, the 2009 Afghan presidential election is coming up in August. Widespread participation in the election will secure the legitimacy of the new democratic government in Kabul. Failure will undermine the already fragile republic. The 19th Light Brigade, the combat element of Task Force Helmand, proposes Operation Panchai Palang, Pashto for Panther Claw. 19 Brigade's commander, Brigadier Tim Radford, later recalls, Mullah Omar, the Taliban founding father, declared central Helmand to be his main effort, and so we decided to meet him with force. It will be the largest British-led offensive of the war thus far. Planning for the operation begins in the UK, months ahead of 19 Brigade's deployment. With the help of Danish and Afghan troops, the battle group will neutralise the Taliban stronghold along the Helmand River Valley, around the town of Babaji. This part of Helmand had previously been secured by the Afghan National Police, but their behaviour upset the locals to such a degree that they turned to the Taliban instead. Nevertheless, British commanders intend to secure the 80,000 people living in Babaji and the surrounding towns in advance of the Afghan elections in August, to prevent the Taliban from intimidating potential voters and allow the local population to participate. Radford's plan seeks to take advantage of the local geography. Babaji and the neighbouring towns of Maljiya and Spin Masjid occupy an area of the Green Zone nestled between the Bari Bugra Canal, the Shamalan Canal and the Helmand River. Brigadier Radford's plan is explicitly simple. Use these natural obstacles to trap the Taliban in the Green Zone, then destroy the insurgency in a whole swathe of the Helmand Valley. The Black Watch will secure the junction of the Nari Bugra and Shamalan canals in the northeast. Next, the 1st Battalion Welsh Guards is to punch north up the Shamalan, securing all of the bridges and crossing points along the way, so it can block the western side of the battlefield. Finally, the Danish battle group will secure the eastern end of the battlefield, allowing the light dragoons to push into the Green Zone on the bank of the Helmand and destroy the insurgents. Commander of the Welsh Guards, Lieutenant Colonel Rupert Thornlow, is increasingly concerned by the operational concept. With improvised explosive devices rapidly becoming the single largest battlefield threat, Thornlow is concerned that there are far too few transport helicopters available. As such, his force and much of Task Force Helmand will be road-bound and vulnerable. More generally, the Welsh officer is concerned that the operation will simply become a case of a big British brigade doing an impressive dynamic operation clearing the Taliban, but lacking the troops to hold the territory, to then be able to build infrastructure, ultimately achieving little in the long run. Brigadier Tim Radford respects his subordinates' views, lauding his forthrightness, but the operation is on. H-hour is set for the early hours of the 20th of June 2009. The operation shown in this video demonstrates the everyday, frustrating, stop-start reality of counterinsurgency combat with the Taliban in Helmand Province, where small teams, often undersupplied and resourced, must patrol, adapt to and overcome situations and issues that come with fighting a counterinsurgency against a hardened enemy who knows their own land. The operations are a grind, and more akin to operations in Vietnam, Malaya, or even Northern Ireland than the pitched frontline battles of the Second World War or Desert Storm, involving patrol movement and reconnaissance across a countryside about which little is known, where often not much happens until a lot happens. At 3:30 am, the Chinooks descend through the darkness, touching down south of their target. A stream of tracers zips between the approaching transports, a Taliban heavy machine gun. The 4 US Army Apaches circling overhead guard closely. In seconds, the machine gun team is smothered by a flurry of 30mm high-explosive shells. The jocks sprint down the rear ramps and into the whirlwind of dust and hot exhaust gases. In minutes, the 350 Black Watch and Afghan army are firm in their perimeter in the Louis Mandé Wadi as the Chinooks clatter skywards again. The force has 2 objectives to seize by sunrise. Alpha Company is tasked with taking the bazaar in the village of Lashkar Calais. Bravo is to secure the west end of the Nari Bugra Canal and dominate the Wadi. As the rifle companies move out, Charlie, the fire support company, mounted in 22 Jackal patrol vehicles, leads the long relief column of Viking and Mastiff personnel carriers out from the gates of Camp Bastion. Their mission is to clear Highway 1 between Camp Bastion and Lashkar Calais. It's the obvious route from the coalition base into the Green Zone, and the Taliban have seeded it with roadside bombs accordingly. Paving the way is Task Force Thor, a highly specialised US Army counter-IED team. Bravo Company makes good time, securing its foothold along the canal and establishing a patrol base in a nearby compound. To maintain pressure, the company launches a series of aggressive patrols that meet fleeting resistance. The almost total lack of ambient light and a maze of irrigation ditches and water obstacles slows Alpha Company's advance on the bazaar. The bazaar is assessed to be a major narcotics hub, crucial for financing Taliban operations, and also acts as a regional stronghold. As the sun rises, the Black Watch secures blocking positions around the web of compounds, then steadily advances inwards. In addition to pounds of equipment and supplies encumbering each soldier, the troops have had to bring what they call consent-winning goods, like pencil cases and school bags, to win over the local population. Coalition forces had warned locals that a battle would be happening, and the village seems deserted, not much use for the pencil cases. Nevertheless, the bazaar and village must be searched, street by street, compound by compound, and room by room. By 7 AM, the surprise of the air assault is wearing off. Small teams of Taliban fighters slip through the irrigation ditches and tree lines, using the dense terrain to try and infiltrate back into Lashkar-Calais. From a hastily constructed observation post on the roof of one of the bazaar buildings, a 3rd Scots sniper team engages insurgents as they appear through the undergrowth from the north, south, and east. The short line of sight around the compound means that most troops simply have to sit and wait, listening to the reports of the outgoing sniper shots, the staccato of return fire, and the thump of RPGs detonating nearby. Completing their sweep of the bazaar and the village, the Black Watch identify an initial 13 improvised explosive devices. At 12:30, Wahid, a soldier of the Afghan National Army, steps on a pressure plate. Company commander, Major Matt Monroe, remembered. His broken body was hurled through the air. Bits of his equipment, bloodied and torn, were strewn over a wide area. A medic races to his aid, and the company radios for a Pedro, a US Air Force Pavehawk medevac helicopter, but the Afghan dies before help can arrive. Shortly after, the fire support company and the rest of the battle group trundles into view, bringing more sappers to demine the village. They will find and disable no fewer than 35 IEDs. Once the village is clear, the engineers start assembling a new fob in the compound secured by Bravo Company, christened Patrol Base Wahid after the fallen Afghan. Incoming rounds smack into the sandbags protecting the sniper team. A Taliban sharpshooter, armed with a Soviet Dragunov sniper rifle, has the British marksman pinned, putting 12 rounds downrange in a few minutes. One of the Black Watch snipers braves the heavy fire to get a glimpse of his enemy. He spots him, compound roof 850 meters. Orienting to the new target, he slips back behind his rifle and slides the bolt home, chambering around. Despite the sweat trickling down his forehead under the merciless Afghan sun, he eases the crosshair over his adversary. With help from the spotter, he adjusts for windage and range. His L-96 kicks, and the Taliban sniper collapses. As night falls, the battle group's Desert Hawk 3 drones detect insurgents concentrating in nearby compounds, this time to the south, angling to assault 1st Platoon, guarding that end of the bazaar. Cleared to engage, the Black Watch sharpshooters dispatch 6 fighters in short order. As the Taliban return fire, 1st Platoon's commander, Lieutenant Cahoon, notices around 30 insurgents are advancing through a nearby tree line. Springing into action, the supporting GPMGs on the bazaar roofs burn through belt after belt of 7.62 ammunition. Private Willie Brown remembers. The Jocks took it upon themselves to form a baseline and take the fight to the enemy. With everything firing, rifles, UGL and LMG, we raised hell. The hardy Pashtun fighters continue to advance despite the British tracer fire whipping overhead. Only a driving hail of 81mm mortar rounds, called in by Cahoon, stalls the assault just 150 metres from the Scottish troops. The Taliban retreat under the bombardment, having lost half of their number. The following days sees more skirmishing between the Scots and the Pashtun insurgents. In one such incident, 3 Taliban approach the perimeter and are spotted by an orbiting Reaper UAV, which promptly eliminates the group with a laser-guided hellfire. In the early hours of the 22nd of June, Charlie Company's Jackals sweep west past Bravo Company to increase their foothold over the northern end of the Shamalan Canal. Throughout the day, they take constant fire from a nearby compound, which they finally silence by calling in a 500-pound JDAM from an American B-1B Lancer. Bravo's compound comes under accurate mortar barrage, with rounds landing just 50 metres from the company headquarters. The attached mortar section swings into action, directed by a counter-battery radar, and silences the Taliban artillery. Despite the constant combat, the Royal Engineers complete Fob Wahid and construct a barrier of HESCO bastion blocks and razor wire across the wadi. Nicknamed Hadrian's Wall, the obstacle is designed to control movement over the canal crossing. In the process, the British troops meet an elderly Afghan gentleman, who was too sick to flee with the rest of the villagers. They ask if he is able to gather the rest of the village elders, but the old man replies, "I'm 80 years old, and I have seen many governments, and none of them have been any help. Why should I believe that this one will help?" By the 24th of June, the Black Watch is firmly in place. Hadrian's Wall is complete, meaning the major crossing point on the Nari-Bugra Canal is now under British control, and the northern edge of the battlefield has been shaped for the second phase of Operation Panther Claw. Battlegroup Headquarters estimates that 3rd Scots engaged around 100 Taliban insurgents, of which at least 48 were killed. The bulk of the Black Watch is now withdrawn for R&R in the United Kingdom. As they depart, one of Charlie Company's Jackals triggers an IED, though fortunately none of its occupants are seriously injured. Bravo Company stays to hold Patrol Base Wahid and the northern end of the Shamalan Canal until the Welsh Guards are to relieve them in place. That night, the Brigade Reconnaissance Force, a heavily armed surveillance and patrol unit, attacks into the Chari-Angier Triangle from the north, on the other side of the canal from 3rd Scots. The thrust at the known Taliban stronghold is a feint, designed to keep the insurgents off balance and commit them to defending north ahead of the next day's actions. On the morning of the 25th of June, Phase 2 of Operation Panther Claw kicks off in earnest. The Prince of Wales Company of the Welsh Guards pushes out from Shorkat and into the Green Zone from the south. With the Taliban anticipating an attack from the north, the 117-strong force is able to roll straight into the town of Chari-Angier itself without firing a shot. While 19 Brigade Headquarters attaches no real importance to the town, Colonel Thornlow tasks Major Giles Harris with securing the settlement to prevent the Taliban from simply recapturing it, adhering to the clear, hold, build mantra. As a result, the Prince of Wales Company spends most of the day establishing a patrol base in an abandoned coalition compound. Despite this success, they have yet to achieve their primary objective, seize crossing points 11 and 14 at the southern extent of the Shamalan Canal. To maintain the initiative, the Welsh Guards march that evening, and rather than travel by the main road south then east then north again to their objective, the expected route, they patrol dismounted directly through the centre of Chari-Angier. Then, making use of the Vikings' impressive cross-country capability, advanced directly across the fields east. British signallers, listening in on their radio frequencies, overhear the Taliban's confusion. "They're coming from behind us. We're facing the wrong way. We need to change our positions." Major Harris recalls, "It's the most wonderful thing to hear your enemy talking on the radio like that." 1st Platoon seizes crossing point 14 without being engaged. While caught off balance, the Taliban adapt, and 2nd Platoon has to fight its way through more stubborn resistance, which is ultimately silenced by 3 500-pound JDAMs from US aircraft in the small hours of the 26th of June. The stage is set for the battalion's primary effort. Disaster nearly strikes when a Jackal belonging to the fire support group is struck by an RPG, but the gunner just so happened to be scrounging in his comrade's ration box at the time, and escaped the worst of the blast. Major Henry Bettinson's 2 Company of the Welsh Guards crosses its line of departure at 6:33 am. So far, the operation is progressing smoothly. Mounted in Viking and Mastiff APCs, they push north, passing through the Prince of Wales Company and onto a road designated Route Cornwall, which runs along the western bank of the Shamalan Canal. The plan is initially straightforward. Advance up Route Cornwall, secure the remaining crossing points along the Shamalan to prevent the Taliban from withdrawing west, then anchor the northern end of the blocking position by replacing 3rd Scots up at Patrol Base Wahid. As soon as the company manoeuvres onto Route Cornwall, it becomes apparent that the brigade terrain analysis was woefully inaccurate. More of a track than an actual road, Route Cornwall is only wide enough for the unit to travel in a single file. Even then, there is barely enough room for the heavy Mastiffs and Vikings. The road is raised 6 feet above the Shamalan Canal, with a steep drop into the water. The top-heavy vehicles could easily roll over into the canal. Then, the men would be sealed in an overturned vehicle, rapidly filling with water, while they are weighed down by their body armour and gear. A gruesome fate all too vivid in the minds of the Guardsmen and the Royal Tank Regiment vehicle crews. Furthermore, the height of the road means the troops are easily visible from the far bank, and lack any cover from incoming fire. Finally, an irrigation ditch on the left-hand side of the track prevents 8 scimitar light tanks, borrowed from the light dragoons, from screening the advance as planned, so the unit's only mobile firepower has to file into the column as well. Starting up the canal, the lead infantry section meets an old man resting on the bank. "Don't go up there, you may die today," he advises the British troops. He explains through an interpreter that the Taliban are lying in wait. No sooner has his warning been translated, RPGs fizz overhead. Facing groups of insurgents from both the east bank and in the west from the uncleared Chari-Angier Triangle, 2 Company opens up. The frantic chatter of GPMGs and steady hammering of the M2 Browning machine guns echoes across the green zone, joined by the ambient crackle of SA-80s, punctuated by the snap of sniper fire. Flights of American and British AH-64s check in throughout the day, adding their weight of fire. The Taliban are highly mobile, using vehicles and motorbikes to rapidly insert fighters ahead of the Welsh Guards' advance, then displace the same way. British rules of engagement prevent the Welsh or supporting Apaches from engaging the Taliban as they withdraw, lest they are evacuating injured fighters. 7th Platoon pushes forward in their Vikings, stopping 800 metres from crossing point 7, one of the company's objectives. Clambering from the boiling, poorly ventilated troop carriers, the British troops rush off the road to avoid the wall of AK-47 and machine gun fire. But the Barmer team, the computer-generated name for a minesweeping section, needs to clear the route for the vehicles to pass. Pouring on a steady fusillade of fire, the platoon is frustrated by the Taliban's habit of moving between compounds, presenting a challenging target. Orbiting overhead, a Predator drone observes the firefight raging along the canal, and strikes the Taliban opposite 7th Platoon with a Hellfire missile. With the insurgents temporarily silenced, 7th Platoon clears the road and remounts their Vikings to assault the position. Flanking around the Taliban compound, the Vikings tear over the undergrowth, across irrigation ditches and low walls. Jostling around in the rear cabin, the platoon commander gives the order, "Attack State Red, fix bayonets." Halting short of the compound, the guardsmen dismount, instantly moving into the assault, blasting open the compound gates, pre-firing through doors, and clearing rooms with grenades. Spotting no Taliban and concerned about wasting ammunition, the company sergeant major calls out, "Lads, this isn't a turkey shoot." Slowly, another guardsman approaches another room, bracing himself, with no idea what could be lurking behind. He kicks in the door. With alarmed squawks, a flock of turkeys escape into the courtyard. It is a turkey shoot, the section shouts with delight. 2 Company drags its way up Route Cornwall, destroying crossing points as it pushes methodically north. Despite the heavy Taliban fire, the guardsmen crawl forwards, painstakingly, through the mud, maize fields, and flooded irrigation ditches. Despite the nearly 40-degree heat, the sweat and the exhaustion, and the 30 kilograms of body armour and equipment, they advance. Bullets buzz inches from their heads. RPGs erupt against the compound walls and trees, but the Welsh keep going, inch by inch. Battalion mortars rain a deluge of high explosive that crumbles even the most stubborn resistance. Apache gunships and GMLRS, directed by Hermes drones, strike precisely, blasting insurgent firing points, steadily grinding the defences to dust. As night falls on the 26th, the Welsh Guards regroup around crossing point 7. Sporadic fighting continues into the night, though technical issues are beginning to hinder the battle group. Notably, the new Bowman battlefield radio net doesn't work the majority of the time. Officers find themselves having to negotiate through the rough terrain and Taliban bullets to give orders face to face. As with any mechanised formation, some of the company's vehicles have broken down, but due to the narrowness of Route Cornwall, extricating the vehicles is a problem in its own right. After the day's heavy fighting, Captain James Jeffery, the battle group's tactical air controller, makes a depressing discovery. Reviewing feeds from the battle group's drones, Jeffery watches Taliban fighters crossing the Shamalan Canal with ease, at points thought to be secured. It turns out the canal is not 10 feet deep as believed by brigade headquarters, but 5 feet deep, therefore easily wadable. One mistake has rendered the idea of a blocking position and the efforts of the Welsh Guards absolutely pointless. I did not know whether to laugh or cry, Geoffrey remembers. The only positive from the 26th of June is that the British advance is surprisingly free of IEDs. It transpires that the Taliban had anticipated an attack down the eastern side of the canal, not the west, so mined the wrong side, a mistake they rectify that evening. Freshly laid IEDs keep the Welsh Guards essentially static through the 27th. Some voices in brigade headquarters suggest Colonel Thornlow's methodical approach is stalling the offensive, but the battalion simply does not have enough men to secure the entirety of Route Cornwall, now that it has been shown to be wadeable. It is hard to overstate just how time-consuming counter-IED sweeps are. Any spike of the metal detectors means that the force stops, and the guardsmen at the head of the patrol, the Barmer minesweeping team, crawl forwards, carefully prodding the earth with their bayonets to probe for a source. Then, if one is not found, the team inch forward on their stomachs, sweeping and stabbing again. Taking over an hour to move 100 metres is not unheard of. To make matters worse, this task cannot be done safely at night, limiting movement to daylight hours. On the 28th, the battlegroup HQ decides to try and move the recce platoon out in front. It takes until 4 AM on the 29th to get the Vikings to them to facilitate the move. The 15 men of the recce platoon squeeze aboard 2 of the articulated carriers, bringing with them a staggering 90 kilograms of gear each. The cramped interiors are filled with Bergens, LAW anti-tank rockets, and heaps of other equipment. At 4:30 AM, the 2 Swedish-built vehicles rumble off from crossing point 7 and turn onto Route Cornwall. They come to a bend in the route, where another Viking is parked on the shoulder, leaving only just enough space to manoeuvre past. Exhausted after driving for 30 hours, the 2nd Royal Tank Regiment driver misjudges. The Viking leans as it slips onto the embankment, the dirt road crumbling under the weight. Despite the driver's best efforts, the rear cab rolls too far, dragging the vehicle over, down the embankment, and crashing into the murky water below. Inside, the guardsmen are thrown against each other. One man is struck in the face by an unsecured GPMG. Another is knocked unconscious by an electronic warfare pack. Plunged into darkness, the vehicle rapidly floods through its open top hatch. The trailing Viking coasts to a stop, and the vehicle commander, Corporal Kev Williams of Egypt Squadron, 2nd Royal Tank Regiment, slides down the embankment and tears off his Osprey body armour and helmet. Right behind him is Captain Tom Spencer Smith, the recce platoon commander. Rushing to the rear of the vehicle, they pry open the troop door and see a mess of detritus, equipment, rifles and ammunition floating in the compartment. Tearing it out of the way, a growing number of guardsmen haul their comrades from under the water, helping them back to the bank. 6 of the recce platoon and the 2 Viking crewmen recover, while the last 2 guardsmen are extracted. Neither Guardsman Carl Thomas or Mark Biggs are breathing. The medics and the assembled soldiers perform CPR and successfully resuscitate Biggs. Thomas is in worse shape. For several minutes the medics continue. "We've lost another boy," a distraught Captain Spencer Smith despairs, sinking to his knees. But, after what feels like hours, Thomas regains consciousness. The recce platoon evacuates the casualties to a helicopter landing site in the remaining Viking. The crew agrees to leave the troop door open for this trip. Just minutes after the call, a pair of US Air Force AH-60 Pedros are on station over the crossing point 7. As the first Pavehawk approaches, the Taliban open fire on the rescue helicopter. Supported by an escorting Apache, the second Pavehawk tears into the insurgent positions with sustained fire from its door guns. With 2 Company isolated by the IED threat, and with the Bowman radios as reliable as ever, Welsh Guards commanding officer Colonel Rupert Thornlow decides he needs to be at crossing point 7 personally, remarking to one colleague at Shawkat, "I'm off up the canal, I'm going to see my boys." There are no helicopters available for anything other than casualty evacuation, so the only way to his company is by Viking. The Swedish-designed BVS-10 Viking articulated amphibious armoured personnel carrier has grown to be hated and feared by the Welsh Guards that ride in it. The rapid increase in IED attacks has rendered its thin armour incapable of protecting its occupants. 6 British soldiers have lost their lives to roadside bombs while riding Vikings. With typical gallows humour, the 2nd Royal Tank Regiment crewmen that operate the vehicles refer to themselves as the 20 Minuters, in reference to the British sitcom Blackadder. Thornlow, fully aware of the risks, decides that he will ride in the lead vehicle as part of the Barmer patrol for a resupply convoy. His regimental sergeant major is anxious at the prospect, but Thornlow deeply believes in never asking anyone to do anything he wouldn't do himself. He insists on facing the same dangers as his men. The convoy sets out at 9 AM on the 2nd of July. Thornlow cradles a light machine gun, manning the rear top cover position of the lead Viking. Call sign 32 Alpha, christened Exorcist by its crew, is commanded by the same Corporal Williams who had helped pull the recce platoon from the overturned vehicle. 32 Alpha leads the convoy north. The CO and the rest of the Barmer team dismount periodically to sweep for explosives. Just half a mile away from the newly established patrol base Shahzad, a devastating explosion rips through Exorcist's cabin. Corporal Williams swears as a fragment of machine gun strikes his head. Frantically, he checks his driver, Trooper Gaz Owen, then clambers onto the vehicle's roof to check the smouldering rear cab. He finds Thornlow mortally wounded and tries to comfort him as the CO slips from consciousness. Lieutenant Colonel Rupert Thornlow is the most senior British officer killed in action since the Falklands War. Watching 2 soldiers extricate his body from the wrecked vehicle, the normally hard-nosed Colour Sergeant Di Matthews barks, "That's my colonel, be careful with him," as he fights back tears. 18-year-old trooper Joshua Hammond, one of the Egypt Squadron crewmen, is also killed instantly, just weeks from the end of his tour and his planned proposal to his girlfriend back home in Plymouth. In the battle group headquarters back in Shawkat, stunned silence fills the room as the command staff stare at the drone feed of the stricken Viking, listening to the casualties being identified. Major Andrew Speed, the battalion's second in command, is only just processing the loss of his friend and commanding officer when another UAV operator announces suspicious movement. 3 unidentified men digging further up the road. The implication is that they could be laying another IED, and the Welsh have fast air on standby to hit them. Not allowing his emotion to override sound decision-making, Speed presses, "Digging? No, what are they doing? What are they digging?" The Royal Artillery drone operator admits he's unsure. "Right, we're not doing that. I'm not just killing people, the 2IC decides, shutting down any thought of careless vengeance." Despite the losses, the Welsh Guards continue advancing. Crossing Point 7 and the other positions are harassed constantly by groups of Taliban fighters, but the battle group's objectives over the Shamalan are held. That night, the battle group remembers its fallen CO. 2 Company Commander Major Bettinson leads a memorial service at Crossing Point 7. "Tonight we mourn. Tomorrow the sun comes up and we're working," he concludes stoically. True to his word, elements of 2 Company reach their final objective the next day, the Black Watch at Patrol Base Wahid. They are exhausted, but somehow in good spirits. The depth of the canal is a stinging disappointment, but the Welsh Guards still contest much of its length, even if they do not have the manpower to seal it completely. Furthermore, the Taliban have paid dearly for every inch of route Cornwall. Hermes drones patrol the length of the Shamalan, directing Apaches and artillery against Taliban infiltrators and IED teams. As the Welsh Guards block the Shamalan Channel as much as they reasonably can, Task Force Helmand prepares to sweep into the final decisive phase of Operation Panther Claw. The task of kicking in the door to the Green Zone falls to the Danish battle group. When the United States invoked NATO's Article 5 clause on the 12th of September 2001, Denmark was among the first nations to answer the call and come to the aid and defence of the United States. Now, in 2009, the 7th contingent of Danish troops are fighting and dying alongside British and Afghan forces in Helmand Province. Centred around 2 infantry companies of the Grand Hussar Regiment, the heavily armed Danish battle group, under Colonel Frank Lissner, has pulled their weight in combat with the Taliban. Their objective is to seize 2 key crossing points across the eastern end of the Nari Bugra Canal, then clear the town of Spin Masjid on the far bank. Ahead of the main action, Danish and Afghan troops conduct dismounted patrols, reconnoitring their route of advance and skirmishing with Taliban forces. The force filters out of Camp Price and up to its staging area north of the canal. At 9:20 am, on the morning of the 2nd of July, the Danes step into the attack. Charlie Company snakes towards the easternmost crossing point. Aboard their up-armoured M113s, gunners scan the compounds and tree lines across the canal, thumbs hovering over the butterfly triggers of their Browning 50 caliber machine guns. Their attack is another feint, drawing Taliban attention from the main axis of attack. Vidar Company, named for the Norse god of vengeance, advances steadily down a wadi similar to that seized by 3rd Scots on the first day. Rumbling forward ahead of the mechanised infantry is a troop of 4 Leopard 2A5DK main battle tanks of the Jutland Dragoon Regiment. Only Denmark and Canada so far have deployed heavyweight main battle tanks to Afghanistan. Most armies, including the US and British, dismissed the idea based on the harsh terrain and logistical issues, but the tanks soon proved their worth. The Leopard 2s prowl down the dry riverbed, following dismounted bomber teams and a specialised Vicent 1 armoured mine plough. The Vicent is a superb enabler, capable of clearing minefields 15 to 20 times faster than by hand. As the tanks climb onto high ground to observe across the flat sands and into Spin Masjid, machine gun fire crackles overhead. MG3 machine guns rasp in reply. The tank's thermal imaging systems trace over the compounds. 120mm guns erupt, blasting apart thick mud walls with heat rounds. The cacophony of heavy shells pummels the Taliban front line, collapsing compounds in blasts of smoke and dust. With their massive firepower advantage, the Danes rapidly suppress the Taliban as the British GMLRS rocket destroys a more distant target. Vidar Company's infantry goes to ground on the flanks of the Leopards, providing covering fire as the Vicent mine-clearing vehicle ploughs a safe path towards Spin Masjid. Just minutes later, an explosion rocks the engineering vehicle, and it disappears in a cloud of dust. Half of Vidar's infantry move up to assist, but the damage is light, just a severed hydraulic line on the mine plough. Dazed by the Danish return fire, and with even their RPGs unable to reliably harm the heavily armoured Leopards, the insurgents decide discretion is the better part of valour and vanish away into the green zone. Slowed by the mine threat, the Danish hussars push into Spin Masjid. With up to 100 compounds in the town alone, it will take the infantry most of the day to painstakingly clear the town. They will find a hurriedly abandoned bomb factory. The Danes suffer 1 casualty, a rifleman in Charlie Company, injured by an IED. Both crossings over the Nari Bugra Canal are secure, and a breach through the Taliban lines and into the green zone has been opened. With every water crossing secured, the Taliban are, in theory, trapped. The Welsh Guards, holding the far side of the battlefield, are the Anvil. Now, with the Danish foothold into the green zone, 19 Brigade swings the hammer. The Light Dragoons battle group, composed of 2 light armour squadrons, reinforced by 2 infantry companies from the Mercian Regiment and a fire support group from the Welsh Guards, is tasked to advance the 10 miles to the Welsh Guards and grind down the remaining Taliban force, trapped around the town of Babaji. On the 3rd of July, they conduct a passage of lines through the Danish breach and into the green zone, under the cover of the brigade's Hermes and Desert Hawk drones, beaming their video feeds down to Royal Artillery officers jostling in the back of vehicles. Apaches of British Army Air Corps 662 Squadron circle the crossing points, anticipating instant contact. So named for its lush, dense vegetation and arable land striking against the featureless desert surrounding it, the green zone straddles the Helmand River. Every acre is covered in fields of maize, corn, and often illegal opium poppies. The fields are bounded by walls, tree lines, irrigation ditches, and strewn with mud-walled compounds. Not unlike the bocage of Normandy in 1944, visibility is severely hampered. Vehicles are often restricted to roads, and the obstacles allow the Taliban to easily ambush the British forces. Having moved just 150 metres out from the bridgehead, the Dragoons run into the Taliban. The Mercians go to ground and pour on the fire with their SA-80s and support weapons, attempting to attain fire superiority. Manually traversing their Radan cannons onto targets, the scimitar light tanks move up to the ambush point, hammering 30mm shells through the tree lines and compounds. RPG rockets tear overhead, and tracers snap through the tall grass. Intelligence suggests the Taliban opposite the Dragoons have been strengthened by hardened foreign extremists, who fight fanatically despite the overwhelming firepower and mounting casualties. Despite the efforts of the Royal Engineers to clear a path for the light Dragoons through the IEDs, stubborn resistance stalls the advance just 400 metres into Malgir. The 4th of July is little different, as the battle group crawls through Malgir. The men clear compounds and fields, sometimes carrying as much as 50 or 60 kilograms of gear in a relentless 40-degree heat. A scimitar light tank triggers a pressure plate IED. The explosion destroys the thinly armoured vehicle, but miraculously, its 3-man crew escapes with only light injuries. In the IED arms race, the Taliban have recently begun employing low metal content bombs, using graphite instead of copper wiring where possible to evade metal detectors. Later that afternoon, a troop of light dragoons and Mercians sweep their way over a bridge in the town, when an RPG slams into the lead Spartan personnel carrier, initiating a well-sighted ambush. As the platoon defends itself, the voice of the Spartans' commander, Lieutenant Guy Disney, crackles over the radio. "I need a heli, I think I've lost my leg." Several Mercian regiment men rush forward to help. The Spartans' bar armour has failed to disable the RPG-7 warhead, and the molten copper jet has detonated a crate of 40mm grenades stored inside, killing 18-year-old Private Robbie Laws and injuring Disney and the 3 other men. Within minutes, a flight of British Army Air Corps Apaches are overhead, hammering steady bursts of chain gun fire and CRV-7 rockets onto the Taliban positions, as an RAF Chinook sweeps in to evacuate casualties. Lieutenant Colonel Gus Fair, the commander of the Light Dragoons, is with his men, carrying stretchers to the specialised medevac helicopter. "I think my tap dancing days are over," Lieutenant Disney cracks as he's carried aboard. In a storm of sand, the Chinook lifts off, nosing over and banking towards Camp Bastion, just a few minutes flying away. The men involved with the casualty clearance filter back towards the forward line of troops when another deafening blast shakes the battle group. An IED buried into the bridge explodes. The bridge was the obvious site for a roadside bomb, and had been swept thoroughly, but none of that matters now. Corporal David Dennis is badly maimed by the blast, with multiple amputations. Mercian B Company commanding officer suffers a head wound caused by a flying fragment of radio antenna. Company Sergeant Major Paul Muckle is severely disoriented by the blast. Medics work frantically to treat the wounded, and this time an American Pavehawk races to the scene. The pair of British Apaches still tear overhead like angry wasps, relentlessly suppressing the Taliban sifting the compounds. They fire over 600 rounds of 30mm high explosive to cover the second medevac flight. Lance Corporal Dennis is pronounced dead on the evacuation flight to Bastion. Captain Phil Durham of the Welsh Guards Fire Support Group despairs. "In an hour, we'd gone from doing awesomely well, getting into fights, winning them, advancing, finding IEDs, to literally just chaos." A Company of the battle group advances the next morning, only to be ambushed and embroiled in combat within half an hour. Fighting lasts all day, and for the cost of 7 wounded, the Taliban have been forced back just 2 fields. 22-year-old Lance Corporal Dane Elson of Captain Durham's Fire Support Group is killed that afternoon by a roadside bomb. The fighting is repetitive and attritional. The Light Dragoons battle group encounters no less than 60 explosive devices, most of which detonate before detection. As one Dragoon put it, "We were essentially manoeuvring in a giant minefield." Brigadier Bradford authorises the increased use of close air support from coalition aircraft, and the increased firepower allows the Light Dragoons battle group to advance slightly faster. Malgir is completely secured, and an operational pause is ordered on the 10th of July, giving the Dragoons a brief reprieve. While the Dragoons reorganise, the Black Watch conducts a second air assault in seizing an overwatched position without resistance that allows Bravo Company to dominate the main road ahead of the Dragoons' advance and disrupt the seeding of IEDs. Notably, the local elders are more open than the old man at Patrol Base Wahid and provide valuable intelligence on Taliban activity, indicating that most of the insurgents have fled the area. On the 12th, the Dragoons resumed their offensive, linking up with 3rd Scots. Now ranging deep into hostile territory, the battle group's supply lines are exposed, and resupply convoys are harried by insurgent attacks. Details are scarce, but a joint operation between UK Special Forces and Danish Jaeger Corps operators neutralises that particular threat. By the 14th, the Light Dragoons battle group arrives short of Babaji. For the final push, Brigadier Radford has acquired even more forces to take Babaji. In the early hours of the 20th of July, RAF Chinooks insert Alpha Company of the 3rd Scots around the town to turn the flank of the Taliban forces. Advancing to meet them, prowling over the open ground parallel to the Babji Road, is a heavily mechanised UK-Danish task force. An armoured infantry company from the 2nd Battalion, the Royal Welsh in warrior infantry fighting vehicles, supported by the 4 Leopard 2 main battle tanks of the Jutland Dragoons. Meanwhile, the Light Dragoons step off once again, pushing through Babaji. Over the next 5 days, the forces clear the high ground surrounding the town of Babaji and the rest of the town itself. Much of the battle group's time at this stage is spent connecting with locals and holding meetings with tribal elders to establish a positive rapport. Brigade intelligence assesses that the Taliban have suffered severe losses, though they are still present, opting to lay IEDs rather than challenge coalition forces openly. While Light Dragoons were conducting Phase 3, the Welsh Guards battle group suffered 5 men killed and several more severely injured defending and patrolling the Shamalan Canal, all but one to Taliban bombs. On the 25th of July, the fire support group of A Company, the Black Watch, is scouting for the site of a potential polling centre for the upcoming election when their lead jackal strikes a roadside bomb. The vehicle is overturned by the blast, wounding 24-year-old Bombardier Craig Hobson, who will later die of his wounds. The Light Dragoons battle group is still short of its ultimate objective, the Shamalan Canal and the Welsh Guards. Preferring the Dragoons to consolidate around Babaji, Brigade Headquarters briefly considers using the Brigade Reconnaissance Force to clear the gap, but with too few helicopters available for an airlift and no safe way of clearing their route of IEDs, Brigadier Radford opts to draw the mission to a close. Operation Panther Claw is declared a success despite the uncleared pocket on the 27th of July. It's an anticlimactic end to the ferocious, gruelling offensive. ISAF intelligence claims that between 200 and 300 of the estimated 500 plus Taliban fighters in the region were killed during the fighting. 10 British soldiers have given their lives between the canals. In newspaper headlines back in the UK, Panther's Claw is celebrated as a success. Even the famously forthright American ISAF commander, General Stanley McChrystal, congratulates the effort. "I needed a victory, and this was it." The celebration is premature. While Panther's Claw may have officially ended, fighting continues. Through August, more British, Afghan and coalition soldiers give their lives attempting to maintain control of the region. Over the course of the fighting, it is thought that hundreds of Taliban escape the encirclement, and IEDs are still killing soldiers in the Green Zone. On the 20th of August 2009, polls opened for the Afghan national election. Of the 80,000 eligible voters, just 150 votes are cast at the sole polling station in Babaji. The dismal turnout is in no small part due to the lingering Taliban presence. With votes cast using fingerprints and ink, it's trivial for Taliban fighters to find and punish anyone who cast their ballot. The failure is a body blow for the credibility of the Afghan government, exacerbated by the supposedly independent Electoral Commission's absurd claim that incumbent President Karzai received over 100,000 votes in Babaji alone. In drawing so many forces for a large concentrated offensive, other British units have suffered lethal Taliban attacks in Sangin and Musa Kalar. In response, the substantial forces massed for the operation were soon redeployed to other flashpoints throughout the province. It's the age-old problem, as Thornlow predicted. Forces would be massed to clear, but too few would be left to hold, making it impossible for security to be built, leaving too few troops to hold the area. The next big offensive in Helmand Province, Operation Moshtarak in 2010, will be forced to fight over much of the same ground.